But before I get started, if you have never made a Canva account, take a minute to log into Canva and make yourself an account because we'll have a little bit of a live tutorial later. But the overall goal with this is to give you a basic understanding of graphic design in Canva so you can work on these AI-leaf module fact sheets. I also just generally want you to be able to communicate about different science concepts and be able to translate your knowledge into visually appealing design. So we'll go ahead and get started. If you don't know me, which I know some of you know me pretty well and others, I think I'm kind of new, but I am Candace and I am the AI Leaf Institute Program Manager. I also work with the Cornell Climate Smart Farming Program. I did my undergrad at the University of Michigan and I studied English and political science. And then I worked at the University of Nebraska Extension as an AmeriCorps service member, and then pretty much immediately took on the role as an assistant program coordinator. And then I did my master's in natural resources in the environment at Cornell. And then I started working with Allison, who I think you met a few weeks ago, working with the Climate Smart Farming Program. And then I also started working with AI Leaf. And then about a year ago, I got a promotion and I have been working as the program coordinator for AI Leaf. But the biggest thing is that I've worked communications and management of outreach for 3 different programs. And I've done a lot of instructional design and educational course development that uses a lot of graphic design. And my nickname is Canva Canvas, so I hope that adds to my kudos. So we'll go ahead and get started with the kind of graphic design basics. So this section is meant to highlight kind of what makes effective design, and I'll go through 10 strategies and lay out some examples for each. So when we are thinking first about graphic design, we should be thinking about creating really just simplifying everything. So avoiding clutter, keeping layouts clean and straightforward. Every element should serve a purpose. So white space or negative space is powerful and you should use it intentionally. So I'm sharing kind of a good and bad example of the power of simplified design. So these are both fall themed festival photos. Can someone unmute or write in the chat and let me know what you notice about the difference between these 2 designs?
Following this same color scheme.
Okay.
The one on the left kind of pops out just with the neon green on it and the yellow moon and all that kind of just it's more vibrant.
Okay.
One of them is way too busy. It has far too much text. It's visually distracting. And
Mhm.
one of them has the pertinent information and it has graphics that really let you inform what the event's going to be.
Okay. So I think that's kind of what I was thinking too. So for some simplicity tips, I recommend reducing text and using images rather than words to draw in the reader. Most people will only glance at something, so you only have maybe a few moments to capture their attention. So with design, often less is more. Having empty space on the page is key for simplifying your design. So just remember white space is your best friend. Um, and then how about this image? Where does your kind of what draws you in first onto the image on the left? Like, what is the first thing you notice?
For me, it's the pictures. My eyes drawn to the center of the 2 pictures, and then I see the open mic above it.
Okay, okay. What about the image on the right? What's the first thing you notice about that one?
The word fundraiser.
Okay. So we are now talking about hierarchy. So hierarchy is really about making the most important elements stand out. So titles, call to action, key visuals. It's about using size, weight, contrast, and positioning to guide the viewer's eye to things that you want them to see and in the exact order that you want them to see them. So some hierarchy tips, use big, bold text for headlines and then smaller sizes for supporting details. You can also achieve hierarchy by using unique font types and color, white space or negative space around the most important information, which you can kind of see in the Saturday night open mic, that the kind of curtains themselves kind of create a white space. But you can also use images and icons to create hierarchy, which you can see in the first picture with the curtains and the microphones. In the second image, there is almost no visual hierarchy, which makes the information challenging to understand. Okay. And then our next kind of key area is alignment. So this is aligning text, shapes, and images for a professional cohesive look. So using grids and guides to achieve balance and structure. The first image has all the center text aligned, which on top of pretty poor hierarchy makes the design challenging to read and understand. Then on the second, on the right, the image, you can see that even though it plays around with center, left, and right alignment, the design still feels consistently aligned. So my alignment tips for you. Canva's ruler is your best friend, as well as thinking about white space. In Canva, anytime you select and move an element, it'll show you when the element that you selected is in line with the other elements, which is extremely helpful. I also want to stress that left alignment is the easiest for people to read, as most people are conditioned to read from left to right. So then we'll go ahead and move forward to our next tip, which is about choosing colors wisely. Okay, so for these two designs, what do people think about the colors that they chose? And what does it do to kind of the design? We'll start with the one on the left side.
It doesn't look very colorblind friendly with like the muted tones, especially with the greens and the reds on the brown background. I'm gonna guess that that's not gonna be accessible to a lot of people with color blindness.
Anyone else have thoughts on this first one on color? What about the second one on the right?
Something I noticed is all the words are outlined in like a black or a white, just outlined black or white.
Yeah. So both of these templates were available on Canvas. So the number one definitely has an elementary school feel, which I think was what they were going for, but it pairs kind of weird with that brown and orange together. It kind of makes it hard to read when they're layered on top of each other. The design also uses different shades of colors, so it kind of just makes the design feel a little incohesive. And then the one on the right is still colorful, but it uses color more strategically. So it also helps to kind of create hierarchy. So my tips for thinking about color is you have to reduce 2 to 4 colors max. Don't go anything more than that. And then also try to make sure that your text and background, there's contrast between those so you have better readability. And then next, we're going to be talking about typography. So font choice is important for your overall feel of your design. So I pulled two. Natalie, do you want to ask a question?
Yeah, just about color. When there's like we want to choose colors that have the most contrast, like how do we know what colors have the most contrast?
That is a really good question. I think it's typically like a light or dark, but you can also look at a color wheel and there's kind of contrasting colors. If you're looking at like, I think I'm not a color expert, but you can look at a color wheel and typically there's like different color pairings that you can do that are easier to see together. And then you can also, I think, pair colors that are similar to each other, complementary colors, but using those, I think, not on top of each other, but near each other. So
cool.
like 2 shades of red that are similar to each other, but they're not like overlapping. Francis, you also have a question?
More of a comment because I can actually speak on this. I worked last year with another student and we put together an accessibility guide and we have a whole section on colors, including colors that work together on things like this, but are accessible to people with like many types of color blindness. They'll be able to see it. I can drop the link in the chat and on our Canva. You just have to, unfortunately, there's not a direct link due to what's going on. Our school did not feel comfortable putting it directly on our webpage because it has to do with diversity and inclusion. So you just have to scroll down a little bit to see the download accessibility guide. But we have other things on there on like fonts that are accessible and consideration on making handouts like these also accessible. So I'll just drop it in the chat.
Well, that's great. Thank you so much. Okay, we'll move back into typography. But definitely stop me if you have questions. So I pulled 2 examples to show you how different fonts can convey kind of different visual energy. And as a rule of thumb, when it comes to typography similar to color, you should limit to how many fonts you have in a design. And you should pair fonts together that have kind of contrasting roles. So one for headings and one for body text. ChatGPT is also really good for font combination recommendations. So you can kind of prompt it like recommend a professional but fun font pairing on Canva, and it'll generate you some pretty good recommendations. And the biggest factor in picking font should be readability over anything else. And ensuring the text is legible across devices and sizes. So sometimes a font is great on print, but it's terrible as a web version. So that's just something you should consider when you're picking a font. So then we're going to talk about contrast. So contrast creates visual and focus interests and involves making certain elements stand out. It's really about layering images and page elements. So hierarchy and contrast are like siblings in the design family. Contrast highlights what's different, and hierarchy tells you what is different because it's more or less important. So contrast can be created by light versus dark or generally with color contrast. You can also make contrast by making certain images or other features more or less transparent or pairing textures. So I included an example of texture contrast in the design on the left. And in the second, you can see how a transparency can also create a certain level of contrast. And you can see how it brings out the contrast with a more transparent image in the back and a very opaque image in the front. So then my tips for creating contrast is layering elements in your design. Knowing where to pull things forward and push things back takes some practice, but once you understand contrast for impact, the design process becomes a lot easier. Also, the more you play with texture, transparency, and color, the better you'll become at creating visual contrast in your design. So then let's talk about balance. Visual balance has to do with the overall weight of different elements on a page and how equal they feel to each other. So my balance tips are to distribute elements evenly, symmetrically, or intentionally asymmetrically. So you also see that my second tip is avoid overcrowding one area while leaving others. So on the design on the left, you can see that the combination of elements kind of makes that design on the right feel a little off balance, but I think that is intentionally done. The asymmetry is kind of to highlight the product that's being sold. So balance here, it's not that it's intentionally asymmetrical because it's trying to draw your eyes to the thing on the page. So playing around with balance is kind of one way that you can kind of focus your design for wherever you want people to pay attention to. So that's just one thing to think about. And then consistency builds cohesion. So when you're doing communications or graphic design professionally, creating a cohesive and consistent branding is extremely important for building recognition and trust. So some tips for building consistency are to repeat design elements. So colors, fonts, icons, styles to create unity. So I'm including the ai-leaf August and September newsletters that I designed to show you how repeating design elements can help create a cohesive design. So ai-leaf has a comprehensive branding guide that I'll share with you, but it walks through our colors and typography and other design elements. So to build consistency in design, I stick to the ai-leaf colors. Headings are all the same color, shape. Subheadings are bold. Text is black. All the text is 1.2 spacing in Roboto Slab. All the boxes, images, and text are tightly aligned. All of these are repetitive elements, but it's really important for building that brand cohesion. So when you're making these ai-leaf fact sheets, I will be looking for all of you to think about consistency in your design so that at the end of the semester, you have fact sheets that look similar to each other and they kind of feel like a cohesive group of fact sheets and not just individual projects. Because we want to share these fact sheets with farmers and other agriculture advisors and K through 12 students. So we'll talk more about the fact sheets later, but that's just something to think about. And then I think it went backwards. There we go. So then we'll talk about testing for readability. So my tips for testing, it went backwards again. My tip for testing readability is to always check legibility at different sizes and distances. So this is particularly important for presentations or posters presentations where you're in person, and you have to kind of think about how far the person who's seeing your design is going to be away from you when you are designing. Like if they're going to be physically holding a fact sheet, you can have things smaller, but if they're only going to be seeing content as a poster, you need to be thinking about that. So prioritize clarity over decoration. If you can't read something clearly, even if it looks aesthetically pleasing, I would recommend changing it to have a more clear design. So I created an example here to show how the ai-leaf logo in the first one, you can't see it because of the background, because it's on a green background. So you can move the logo to a different part of the photo or use a different photo logo color. You can also change the photo or add a shape behind the image to improve readability. So these are just some things that we can think about for readability. And then also knowing your medium. So the last design basic is to know, basically, is this going to be print or web or mobile, or is it going to be some sort of social media? You should be paying attention to the resolution, like the aspect ratios, and then the file formats. A photo in a flyer, for example, may look really good online, but then has poor resolution when you print it. So I always like to print an example of copy of flyers to make sure everything looks okay. So those were my kind of high-level overview of some graphic design basics. And then I want you now all to open Canva up because we're doing a live tutorial. But before I move on, does anyone have any questions about these graphic design basics?
Could I say something real quick?
Yeah.
I love all of this. As a disabled person and somebody who's really focused on accessibility, do you ever have any formal process where before you finish, kind of like what you're talking about, like check for readability, check for all these things, do you do an accessibility check, or is that anything you'd like to learn about? Because especially when we're talking about handing this to farmers and people who maybe don't have formal educations, a lot of people who don't have formal educations often have undiagnosed disabilities or learning difficulties, and making sure that handouts we're giving to people are accessible, I personally feel is really important.
You know, that I think is something that I always consider with my designs is accessibility. And there's a lot of university requirements for accessibility. Like if we make something like our newsletter, we have to have kind of a accessible version of that. So I definitely feel like it would be if for you all developing these fact sheets, if I think this is Francis, if you also want to kind of chair and think through that when you're making these fact sheets, I think that would be extremely useful.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously some disabilities require more intensive accommodations like Braille and things like that. but there are things like, 'cause I know I've worked in clubs before where we have to stick with like the default font, the default colors, like all of that decision. Um, and I think I caught what font you said we need to use. And I believe it's not one that's like, there are very standard fonts available,
Mhm.
which are more friendly and easier for people who have reading difficulties to actually read. And so I just wasn't sure if how much leeway we maybe have with like font choice on our fact sheets, or if we have to stick with that one that was selected for the branding.
So that's a really good question. I
Yeah.
I think that for now we'll stick to the branding for AI Leaf, but maybe we also create some
Yeah.
additional materials that are more accessible. Um, because I think we really do care about having very consistent branding and design, but I do really care about accessible educational
Yeah.
materials. So I think that there is a balance between both. So we can think more about that. I want everyone to open Canva. Is everyone ready to go? Give me some like thumbs up reactions if you are done. Okay, great. Let's get started. I'll share my screen again. So I'm going to do a live tutorial, so I hope this doesn't get confusing with seeing my screen with kind of prompts on there, because I wanted you to be able to go back to look at the design. So then I want you all to go to this kind of home page. And then when you're in there, click on, and on the left side, you'll see there's a create, a home, a projects, and templates. I want you to click on create and create a flyer, and you'll kind of follow through the different elements. Okay, so then let's move forward here. So when you're in this create button, you'll see that there's some options for different things that you can create. I typically use, mostly my work is focused kind of on these flyers, presentations, posters, infographics, social media, videos, and banners. I also have a beautiful Canva resume. And then some types of design I don't use frequently, but I think are really useful. You can build an educational course on Canva, branded websites, materials and t-shirts. They also just released a Canva version of like Google Sheets, which I haven't really gotten to try out, but I think it's pretty cool that they had that. And you should also note that there's a section at the bottom left-hand corner here that's focused on the custom design. So you can kind of play with the dimensions of your document if you have something really specific. You can also upload pretty much any document and it'll put it on Canva. So you can upload a Word document and then just adding a little bit of extra details to there. And then go ahead and move forward. So we're going to practice a few of these elements, but on the left-hand side, you'll see you have a design. So this is where you are going to find all of your cheat sheets, your templates. And if you're very unfamiliar with Canva, templates are going to help you so much to kind of learn some of the basics of graphic design. I would start by using a lot of the templates. And then on the next page, you'll see that we have kind of these elements. So you'll have frames, graphics, shapes, lines, stickers, photos, charts, tables, videos, audio, grids, polls, quizzes, and mockups. But today we're really just going to learn how to use a few of them. Brennan, you have a question?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if, so once we have access to the AI Leaf templates, will that be something we'll download and then that will show up on these template or slash styles on Canva?
So it will show up as a project and not as a template. So templates are really from Canva directly. But you can share projects across Canva pretty easily. So we'll share the template that we developed, and then you guys can either go off grid with that template, create your own, or you can follow it. It's really just to help you kind of understand what we're looking for, but you can really be creative with it. Okay, so we're going to start with frames. So I want you to go to Elements, And then I want you to click on frames. So you can type in the search bar frames. And then once you have a frame, click on that. And you can also drag it onto your flyer. Okay, and then once you're there, I want you to practice going through and making some changes to your frame. So find a photo, and you can type into the elements section to type in a photo. So I will pick, let's see, agriculture. And then you can drag that photo to your frame, and then it'll stick into the frame. And then at the top here, I want you to edit your photo. So go in and click adjust, or just play around with different things you can do to edit your photo. You can press auto adjust or kind of put a filter on it, just something to give you a feel for editing that photo. And then practice cropping your photo. And then the other ones you should try are to go into the giving it a outline. So you can click on the one with the 3 lines, and then it should be kind of maybe a 1-point background, or kind of give it some different dimensions there. And then you can also change the color of the outline. So if you click on the stroke color, it should come up, and then you can click in and pick any color for your border color background. And then you'll also see at the top there's a option for corner rounding. And then I usually go for like a 25% rounded for AI leaf designs. Sometimes like 44. So that's just a way you can kind of create shapes there, or create rounding. And then you can also create a more transparent shape by just drawing this kind of to the left, depending on how transparent you want your image to be. And then the other thing I want you to do is pull a new photo in. So pull a photo in from the left to add to your design. And then take the paintbrush option and copy your photo. And then it should change that photo to have the kind of same effects that you did, that you changed. So that's the first kind of overview of frames. So you can we're just gonna play around with this. It kind of takes a while to get used to using these different elements. But then we're also gonna try a different element. So I'll give you a second, and then the next element we're gonna try is shapes. So in elements on the left-hand side, type in shape, and then pick any shape. And then once you have your shape, go through that same process of going through edit, and then you can kind of change what shape you selected. You can change the color. You can add a border. You can create rounding, add more points, and then you can also create a more transparent shape. And then you can also do the process of highlighting a shape and copying the style. So that kind of, once you understand how to edit one element, it kind of becomes a little seamless on editing all of the different elements. And then the other, I'm going to keep this moving forward because I want you all to have a little bit of time. So I'm sorry, this is a very quick tutorial, but the other thing you should click now on the left-hand side, you'll see text. So click on that text on the left to add a text box. And then you should go through and practice changing the text. And then this kind of T with the separation bar is how you change your spacing, your line spacing. So I typically do a 1.2 spacing for my designs, but it really kind of depends on what you're designing. But for ai-leaf, we typically use Robotos Lab Bold for headings, paragraphs, Robotos Lab, and then spacing 1.2. So that's a little bit about text editing. And then there's also on the side an upload section. And this is for uploading photos. So you can go to Google or anywhere you're downloading a photo, and then press upload files, and you can upload pretty much any file. Oh no, it's gonna freeze now. And then some other helpful kind of photo tips, that you should look for photos in the public domain by adding a filter on Google Images, especially if we're kind of distributing these flyers. And then Pexels is another great place for free downloads and stock images. You should have access to the Canva free photos. And then I also have Canva Pro and Adobe Stock. So if there's a photo that you want on Premium, just let me know and I can get that for you. And then when it comes to apps on the left-hand side, the one I think will be most useful is, for now, downloading a QR code generator. So click on apps, type in QR code generator, and then you'll add a link to wherever website you're trying to go. And then if you click down to customize, you can change the color of the QR code background and the foreground color, and then update code. And then my suggestion on QR codes is always scan your code before you print, just to make sure it works. And that was my very, very quick Canva and graphic design tutorial. And maybe I have a few slides on the fact sheet overview process. So today we have 3 fact sheets to start developing, which is kind of the overview of our undergrad scholars program. One that is from Dr. Chatterjee about the broad overview of AI in agriculture and forestry, climate impacts, and then Dr. Maria Ginny's presentation last week of kind of the basic computer science concepts and a broad overview of AI. We also talked about kind of this process of having people who are more familiar with the concept be on the editor team, and people who are less familiar with the concept of being on the creator team, because we want people who are less familiar with the concept to be kind of involved in kind of the creation and really learning that material. And I also thought it would be helpful if for each fact sheet we had a lead person for the creator team and the editor team. So I also just want to make sure everyone isn't just always a creator and always an editor, so taking turns in between those things. I also thought we could walk through the fact sheet development process. So you're going to be given time to work on these fact sheets during every kind of 3 weeks. And no work is required outside of this session, but so that just means you have to be pretty efficient with your time. We kind of don't have a lot of time today, so we'll kind of have more time later on, but I think the creator team will kind of work on drafting these fact sheets. And then when you finish, you'll send to the editor team to get review and feedback. And that will go back then after that feedback process to the creator team, and then you'll submit that on Canvas. And then fact sheets will be reviewed by our team, Natalie, Luke, and myself and Robin. And we'll also have our speakers review those fact sheets. And we'll give you feedback and then return that to you all. And then we'll have a final submission of all the fact sheets at the end of the semester. So I think that's kind of it for now.